64K. Where the future is so bright you gotta wear shades.
Thanks for joining, and in this series I'm going to be jumping back and forth between new and old, chronicling the entire Sega Ages series and its spin-offs. If you like Sega and retro, then welcome to Sega Ages, Then and Now. Today's episode features Space Harrier on the Sega Saturn, the remake on the PS2, and the latest Nintendo Switch version of the game. So let's first start with the then, and for that we'll look at the two Japanese Sega Ages releases of Space Harrier. First up is the 1996 Sega Saturn release, which was second in a long line of individual releases the Ages series celebrated in Japan. For Western audiences, we only got the Sega Ages Volume 1, which was a compilation of 3 of the most iconic titles. Space Harrier was one of them. You can see my first episode of the series for more information on that. The 1996 Japanese release was really something special. Not only did the game sport an extra arranged soundtrack, which was omitted from the Western release, but it came in a pack including the mission stick for that authentic arcade feel. Besides those perks though, the game on the Saturn is pretty much an identical port of the arcade classic, featuring all 18 stages, that brilliant Hiroshi Kawaguchi soundtrack, and all that fast-paced action that made this on-rails Yu Suzuki game so popular in 1985. Although at the time of the release the game was just over a decade old, that thrill even in 1996 of playing an almost perfect arcade game at home was amazing as ever, and the graphics and the gameplay captured the arcade flawlessly. And it's definitely a must-own Japanese Sega Saturn release. We're now going to jump ahead 7 years to 2003, and Sega was a whole new company. With the demise of the beloved Dreamcast and their new direction of being simply a third-party software developer leads us to the PlayStation 2 remake of the original arcade game. This was part of Sega's second series of the Ages brand, starting in 2003 and ending in 2008, all on the Japanese PS2. In total, there were 33 volumes, with many of those featuring multiple games. Unfortunately, Western audiences only got one release featuring 10 games under the Sega Classics collection on the PS2, but luckily Space Harrier is one of those games. The 2500 series of Ages games were different in the fact that a lot of the releases weren't simply ports, but remakes, taking the games from the 2D era and giving them a new 3D makeover. Tamsoft Corporation did this remake, and they would later go on to make the really popular Oni-Chanbara series of action games. The game itself is a complete 3D reimagining of Space Harrier, as everything is the same but just looks very different. 2 new stages were also added, plus the music has been remixed to give it a more modern flavor. Graphically, the game is not going to blow you away, but considering the 2500 series goal, side note, the 2500 is actually a reference to each game only costing 2500 yen, or roughly $25, making this series directly aimed at a budget release. So if you consider that, it's not too bad, and you do get used to it after a few minutes. It still runs fast and plays well. There's also an added Panzer Dragoon type lock-on feature to help with aiming if you needed it. Overall though, it may not look all that great, but the gameplay is solid, and I had a lot of fun playing it, and seeing the classic through this new 3D angle was still pretty fun. Okay, let's jump on over to the now for the recent Nintendo Switch release of Space Harrier. Sega and M2 continue their brilliant ports to the Switch with another knockout version of the classic game. This version is based on the excellent 3DS version, which was featured in the Japanese release of the Sega 3D Classics collection. Option-wise, it's got all the features you could want, like multiple display options, from full to widescreen, graphic smoothing, scan lines, wallpaper sides, so you can get it to look however you want. It's got the original arcade mode with the option to have stage select on and off, which means every time you play and get a level further, it records that and gives you the option to start your game from that level, which is pretty cool. There's also a new mode called Komainu Barrier Attack, which sets these 2 Komainu on either side of you, forming a barrier, which makes you pretty much invincible to columns, trees, rocks, and everything, except enemy fire. It's pretty fun, and it's an easy way to play the game, and might be good for younger players, or if you just want to have some good old mindless fun. The graphics are arcade perfect and runs like a dream, and it also plays really well on the analog Switch controller. And of course, this is all complemented by the original Kawaguchi soundtrack, which never gets old. If you've never played Space Harrier before, then this is definitely the best home version in my opinion. It retains the look and, more importantly, the feel of the arcade original perfectly, and it's still a fast-paced, fun on-rails shoot 'em up that you can pick up and play in an instant. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.